After Jimin's unexpected decision shatters Jungkook's heart, one painful night changes everything they thought they knew about trust and friendship forever. Am I not important to you anymore? Jungkook's trembling voice broke through the cold silence just as Jimin closed the apartment door behind him. The question was barely louder than a whisper, yet it struck harder than thunder. Jimin froze with his hand still resting on the doorknob. Outside, rain hammered against the windows, turning the city lights into blurred rivers of gold and silver. The air smelled of wet concrete and freshly soaked leaves drifting through the half-open balcony door. Inside, only the ticking clock dared interrupt the suffocating silence between them. Jungkook stood in the middle of the living room, his eyes glistening under the dim ceiling light. His fingers refused to stop shaking. He had rehearsed dozens of speeches during the long hours of waiting. None of them survived the moment Jimin finally came home. Jimin slowly turned around. "What are you talking about?" His voice remained calm, almost too calm. The calmness hurt more than anger. Jungkook laughed softly. It wasn't amusement. It was the desperate laugh people make when their hearts begin falling apart faster than they can catch the pieces. "You didn't even notice." Jimin frowned. "Notice what?" "The fact that I've been sitting here since sunset." Only then did Jimin glance toward the untouched dinner on the table. The rice had become cold. The soup had formed a thin layer across its surface. 2 bowls, 2 pairs of chopsticks, one meal that was never shared. Jimin's shoulders lowered ever so slightly. "I'm sorry." Those 2 words should have healed something. Instead, they widened the crack. "Been saying that a lot lately." Silence answered. Jungkook looked toward the rain-covered window. Every reflection reminded him of happier nights. There had been evenings when Jimin would burst through the door carrying snacks they both loved, laughing before saying a single word. There had been nights filled with endless conversations, silly games, late-night movies, and dreams whispered until sunrise. Now, the apartment echoed, not with laughter, but absence. Jimin slowly placed his bag on the floor. "Just been busy, I know. Never wanted to hurt you. I know that too." Another pause. But somehow, Jungkook finally looked directly into Jimin's eyes. "You still did." The words landed like stones dropped into deep water. Neither of them moved. Neither knew how Jimin wasn't cruel. That was exactly why everything hurt so much. Pain caused without intention often left the deepest scars. Jimin rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he had whenever guilt quietly found him. There were things he hadn't told Jungkook, not because he wanted secrets, because he believed carrying them alone would protect everyone else. For weeks he had been helping someone through an overwhelming personal crisis, disappearing for hours, answering mysterious phone calls, and returning home emotionally exhausted. Each time he thought about explaining everything, the words dissolved before reaching his lips. What if Jungkook misunderstood? What if telling him only added another burden? So Jimin chose silence. Tonight he finally realized silence had become another kind of betrayal. Jungkook slowly sat on the couch. His shoulders looked smaller than usual. "I kept asking myself what I did wrong. Didn't. I wondered if I talked too much. Don't. I wondered if you finally got tired of me." Jimin immediately stepped forward. "Stop." "I couldn't stop." Jungkook smiled weakly. "When someone important starts drifting away, your mind creates thousands of reasons." His eyes became red. "Every single one blames yourself." Jimin's chest tightened. He remembered every unread message, every cancelled dinner, every promise delayed until tomorrow. He hadn't noticed the invisible weight accumulating on Jungkook's shoulders, not because he didn't care, because he believed there would always be another chance. Life had quietly proven otherwise. The rain intensified, wind rattled the balcony glass. Jimin sat beside Jungkook, close enough to hear every uneven breath, far enough to reveal the invisible distance that had grown between them. "I was trying to protect you." Looked at him. "From what?" Jimin hesitated. Memories flashed through his mind. Hospital corridors, sleepless nights. A promise he had made to someone who begged him not to tell anyone. Fear, responsibility, exhaustion, all hidden beneath smiles that became harder to maintain every day. "I can't tell you yet." Those words broke whatever hope still remained inside Jungkook. His lips trembled. "So I'm still outside your world." "That's exactly where I am." He stood up slowly, carefully, as if even standing required every remaining piece of strength. "I don't need every answer." His voice cracked. "I just needed to know I still mattered." Jimin reached toward him instinctively. His fingertips barely brushed Jungkook's sleeve before Jungkook stepped away, the smallest movement. It felt like an endless ocean opening between them. For the first time in years, Jimin saw fear inside Jungkook's eyes, not fear of danger, fear of becoming forgettable. That expression would remain in Jimin's memory forever. Hours passed. Neither slept. Jungkook quietly retreated into his bedroom. He didn't slam the door. He simply closed it, softly, respectfully. The gentleness somehow hurt even more. Jimin remained alone in the living room. The untouched dinner still rested on the table like silent evidence of everything left unsaid. He replayed every conversation from the past month, every excuse, every delayed promise, every moment he believed there would be time later. Later had arrived, and it looked nothing like he expected. Inside the bedroom, Jungkook lay awake staring at the ceiling. Moonlight filtered through rain-covered glass, painting pale reflections across the room. Sleep refused to come. Every time he closed his eyes, another memory surfaced. Jimin laughing, Jimin waiting, Jimin saying, "I'll always be here." Memories weren't painful because they were false. They were painful because they were real. Tears rolled silently across his face, not dramatic, not loud. Just quiet tears that soaked the pillow one after another throughout the endless night. He wasn't crying because he hated Jimin. He cried because he loved the version of their bond that now felt painfully distant. In the next room, Jimin remained awake until dawn. The first rays of sunlight slowly replaced the storm outside, but no sunrise could erase the heaviness inside the apartment. Two people occupied the same home, separated not by walls, but by everything they had failed to say. A silent morning forces Jimin and Jungkook to face the distance between them, where hidden truths and unspoken fears begin changing everything. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the apartment long before sunrise. But it failed to warm the emptiness that had settled inside the rooms. Jimin had not slept. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes as he stood in the kitchen, absent-mindedly stirring a pot of porridge that neither of them usually ate. It was the meal his mother used to make whenever someone in the family was emotionally exhausted. Without realizing it, he had returned to that memory, hoping familiar comfort could somehow repair what words had failed to heal. The spoon clinked softly against the pot. The sound echoed louder than it should have. From behind the closed bedroom door came no footsteps, no music, no sleepy greeting, only silence. Jimin glanced toward the hallway for what felt like the 100th time before quietly placing two bowls on the dining table, one across from the other, just as always. When the bedroom door finally opened nearly an hour later, Jungkook emerged wearing a loose gray hoodie, his eyes swollen from a night spent crying. His hair was uncombed, and his movements were slower than usual, as though every step demanded effort. For a brief second, their eyes met, neither smiled. "Good morning," Jimin said carefully. Jungkook nodded without answering. He walked past the dining table, reached for a glass of water, and stood by the window overlooking the rain-soaked streets below. The distance between them was barely a few meters. Emotionally, it felt immeasurable. "You should eat something," Jimin said. "Not hungry." "You haven't eaten since yesterday." "I know." Jimin lowered his gaze. He remembered every occasion when Jungkook had worried over him in exactly the same way, bringing medicine when he was sick, staying awake through long nights whenever Jimin couldn't sleep, quietly placing food beside him during exhausting workdays. Back then, Jungkook had never asked for gratitude. He simply cared. Now the roles had reversed, yet Jimin realized too late that concern sounded hollow when trust had already begun slipping away. Jungkook rested one hand against the cold glass. Outside, people hurried beneath umbrellas, each rushing toward destinations unknown. He envied them. They looked certain. He no longer felt certain about anything. His greatest fear had never been being alone. It had always been becoming unnecessary to someone he treasured. As a child, he had watched friendships disappear without explanation. People promised forever, then quietly walked away. Those memories had taught him to notice every delayed reply, every distracted expression, every forgotten promise. Most people called him overly sensitive. Only Jimin had once called him observant. Now that same sensitivity was convincing him history was repeating itself. Behind him, Jimin finally spoke. "Owe you the truth." Jungkook turned slowly. "I can't tell you everything." A flicker of disappointment crossed Jungkook's face before disappearing behind practiced composure. "But I can tell you why I stayed silent." Jimin inhaled deeply. "I thought protecting someone meant carrying everything by myself." His voice remained steady, though his fingers trembled against the edge of the table. "I believed if I shared my worries, they would become yours too." Jungkook listened quietly. "So I smiled whenever I saw you. I said I was fine, kept leaving. I convinced myself you'd understand eventually." A bitter smile appeared on Jungkook's lips. "You never gave me the chance." The words settled gently between them. No accusation, only truth. Jimin closed his eyes. He realized he had made every important decision alone. not because Jungkook was incapable of helping, because Jimin feared becoming a burden. Ironically, that very fear had become the burden. I underestimated you, Jimin admitted. Carried me through my worst days before. I should have trusted you to stand beside me this time. Jungkook remained silent for several long moments. The quiet was different now, less hostile, more thoughtful. Finally, he walked toward the dining table and sat down, not because everything had been forgiven, but because he wanted to listen. Jimin placed the warm bowl in front of him. Steam curled gently into the air. For the first time since the previous night, they shared the same space without looking away. Jungkook lifted a spoon. The first bite tasted almost bland, not because of the food, because emotions often stole the ability to notice flavor. You know, Jungkook murmured after a while, I wasn't angry that you were busy. Jimin looked up. I was afraid you were happier without me. Confession struck Jimin harder than any argument could have. He reached across the table, hesitating only a moment before placing his hand over Jungkook's. This time, Jungkook did not pull away. I'm not happier without you. His voice was barely above a whisper. Just been making terrible choices. Jungkook studied his face. There was no defensiveness, no excuses, only exhaustion and regret. For the first time in weeks, he believed Jimin wasn't hiding because he wanted distance. He was hiding because he didn't know another way to cope. It didn't erase the hurt, but it changed its shape. Outside, the rain finally stopped. A beam of sunlight slipped through the clouds and stretched across the dining table, illuminating the untouched second bowl that had slowly grown cold. Jungkook noticed it first. You still made breakfast for yourself. Jimin smiled faintly. I was hoping we'd eat together. Jungkook quietly pushed the second bowl closer to him. It'll probably taste better if it's warm. Sentence was simple, ordinary, yet to Jimin, it felt like the first fragile bridge being rebuilt between them. Neither of them spoke much after that. They simply shared breakfast while the morning light gradually filled the apartment. The wounds had not disappeared. Trust would not return overnight. But beneath the lingering sadness, something small had begun to grow again. Hope. As fragile hope returns, one unexpected message forces Jimin and Jungkook to confront the truth they have both been avoiding. 3 days passed in uneasy peace. The apartment slowly regained its familiar rhythm, but nothing felt entirely normal. Morning greetings became quieter. Meals were shared again, yet conversations rarely lasted long. The silence between them no longer felt hostile, but it carried the carefulness of two people afraid that one wrong word might reopen a wound that had barely begun to close. Jungkook noticed every little effort Jimin made. The forgotten messages stopped. Jimin returned home before sunset whenever he could. He even resumed their old habit of leaving handwritten notes on the refrigerator. Forget your lunch, sleep early tonight, luck today. They were ordinary sentences, but sometimes ordinary kindness carried extraordinary meaning. Even so, something continued to trouble Jungkook. Jimin still disappeared for several hours every evening. He no longer lied about it. He simply smiled apologetically and said, I'll explain when the time is right. Jungkook wanted to believe him. Most days he succeeded. On other days, doubt whispered louder than trust. That afternoon, the apartment was unusually quiet. Jungkook had finished cleaning the living room and was watering the small plants lined along the balcony railing. They had bought them together months ago, after joking that neither of them could keep a cactus alive. Most of the plants had survived. One had not. Jungkook often wondered whether people were more like the surviving flowers or the one that had quietly withered despite receiving sunlight every day. His thoughts were interrupted by the vibration of a phone on the coffee table. Jimin had forgotten it. The screen lit up, a message appeared. Thank you for staying with me today. I couldn't have done this without you. Jungkook froze, his heartbeat quickened. He knew he shouldn't read any further. He respected Jimin too much for that. Still, those single words lingered in his mind. Without you, who was sending them, why had Jimin never mentioned this person? Before he could think any further, the front door opened. Jimin stepped inside, breathing slightly faster than usual. Forgot my phone. His eyes immediately found the device on the table, then they found Jungkook. Neither spoke for several seconds. I didn't read everything, Jungkook said quietly. I only saw the notification. Jimin nodded slowly. I figured. There was no anger in his expression, only concern. What are you thinking? He asked. Jungkook looked down, trying not to make the same mistake twice. Jimin frowned gently. What do you mean? The last time I assumed something, I convinced myself you didn't care about me. He smiled faintly. I don't want my imagination to hurt us again. Jimin's chest tightened. Without saying a word, he walked over and sat beside Jungkook on the couch. You deserve an explanation. Jungkook remained silent, giving him space to continue. Jimin stared at his hands. There is someone I've been helping. I know. They've been going through one of the hardest periods of their life. Jimin's voice became softer. They lost someone very important to them. They've been struggling just to get through each day. Jungkook listened without interrupting. I promised I'd keep their situation private, so I couldn't tell anyone. He looked up. Because I didn't trust you, because it wasn't my story to share. Jungkook understood, perhaps not completely, but enough. There are promises, he said quietly, that protect other people. Jimin nodded. And there are silences that accidentally hurt the people standing closest to you. Sentence lingered between them. It carried no blame, only understanding born from pain. Jimin let out a slow breath. Been trying so hard to keep one promise that I almost broke another. Promise to never make you feel alone. Jungkook's eyes shimmered. You almost did. I know. I'm sorry. This time, the apology felt different. It wasn't spoken to end the conversation. It was spoken because Jimin fully understood the weight of what had happened. Jungkook leaned back against the couch. You know what scared me the most? Jimin waited. I wasn't afraid you'd leave. I was afraid you'd stop needing me. Confession settled heavily in the room. Jimin smiled sadly. Never needed you less. He looked directly into Jungkook's eyes. I just forgot that needing someone also means letting them carry your burdens. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Outside, children laughed as they chased one another through puddles left behind by yesterday's rain. Life continued, messy, unpredictable, beautiful. Jungkook finally laughed softly. Been overthinking again? You have. You know it's a bad habit. I know. You still stay. I always will. Answer came without hesitation. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was calm, steady, and sincere. Jungkook realized that trust did not return because every question had been answered. It returned because both people chose honesty, even when honesty was uncomfortable. The apartment felt warmer that evening. They cooked dinner together, laughing quietly when Jimin accidentally dropped vegetables onto the floor and Jungkook teased him for being hopeless in the kitchen. For the first time in weeks, the laughter sounded natural, not forced, not borrowed, real. As night settled over the city, they sat on the balcony with 2 mugs of warm tea. The streets below glittered beneath rows of golden lights. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Sometimes silence was no longer a wall. Sometimes it became a place where 2 hearts could finally rest. Jungkook closed his eyes and let the cool night breeze brush against his face. The pain had not vanished completely. Perhaps it never would. But it no longer felt like proof that he had become unimportant. Instead, it had become a reminder that even the strongest bonds could lose their way, and that with patience, honesty, and compassion, they could also find their way home again.
Conversation helps Jimin and Jungkook heal old wounds as they discover that trust is rebuilt through honesty, not perfection. Morning sunlight poured through the curtains, painting long golden streaks across the wooden floor. For the first time in what felt like weeks, the apartment no longer carried the heavy atmosphere of uncertainty. The air smelled of toasted bread and freshly brewed coffee, while the quiet hum of the kettle filled the kitchen with a comforting rhythm. Jimin stood at the counter, carefully preparing breakfast. He wasn't rushing. Every movement was deliberate, as though he wanted this ordinary morning to remind both of them that healing often began with small, consistent actions rather than grand gestures. Jungkook entered the kitchen a few minutes later, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. He paused when he saw the breakfast already waiting on the table. Been awake for a while, he said. Jimin smiled faintly. I couldn't sleep much. You thinking? I was. About what? Jimin placed 2 cups of coffee on the table before sitting across from him. About how easily people assume love or friendship disappears overnight. Jungkook looked at him quietly. But most of the time, Jimin continued, it doesn't disappear, slowly gets buried beneath things we never say. The words lingered in the peaceful morning air. Jungkook wrapped both hands around his warm mug. I kept waiting for you to notice I was hurting. I know. You kept waiting until you had the perfect explanation. Jimin nodded with a tired smile. I thought if I couldn't explain everything, I shouldn't explain anything. That was my mistake. Jungkook shook his head gently. We both made mistakes. There was no bitterness in his voice, only acceptance. Over the following days, they began rebuilding habits they had quietly abandoned. They cooked dinner together again. They watched old movies they had seen countless times, laughing at scenes they already knew by heart. They took evening walks through a nearby park. where the scent of blooming flowers mixed with the cool breeze that drifted through the trees. Sometimes they talked for hours, other times they simply walked side by side. Neither felt pressured to fill every silence. One afternoon, while organizing an old bookshelf, Jungkook found a worn notebook tucked behind several novels. Its pages were slightly bent, the cover faded with time. "What's this?" he asked. Jimin looked over and immediately recognized it. "I thought I'd lost that." He carefully took the notebook into his hands. "It's a journal I started years ago." "You wrote in a journal?" Jimin laughed softly. "Very often. Only when I couldn't understand my own feelings." Jungkook smiled. "Did it help?" "Sometimes." He flipped through a few pages before stopping near the middle. Without thinking, he read one sentence aloud. "People we fear losing the most are often the ones we forget to reassure." Jimin stared at the words. "I wrote that." "You did?" A quiet smile spread across his face. "Guess I needed to read my own advice." Jungkook chuckled. "So did I." He remembered countless nights spent imagining the worst simply because he was afraid to ask difficult questions. Fear had spoken louder than trust. Now he understood that honest conversations, though uncomfortable, were far less painful than silent assumptions. Later that evening, they decided to cook together. Jimin chopped vegetables while Jungkook stirred a pot of soup. Predictably, Jimin sliced one carrot into uneven pieces. Jungkook laughed. "Had years to improve. I call it artistic cutting." "You call everything artistic." "Sounds better than careless." Kitchen filled with genuine laughter. It wasn't forced. It wasn't covering pain. It simply existed. After dinner, they carried 2 mugs of tea onto the balcony. The city stretched beneath them, glowing beneath thousands of lights. Cars moved like slow rivers through the streets below, while a gentle breeze carried the distant sounds of conversations and music from nearby apartments. Jungkook leaned against the railing. "You know, HM, I don't think I was really asking whether I mattered." Jimin looked at him. "I think I was asking whether we still mattered." Jimin stood beside him. "We do. We'll have to protect this. Every day," Jungkook nodded. "Because we're afraid of losing it. Because it's worth taking care of." Jimin smiled. "I couldn't have said it better." For a long while, they watched the stars slowly emerge between drifting clouds. Neither expected life to become perfect. There would still be stressful days, misunderstandings, moments of doubt. They were human. But they had learned something far more valuable than avoiding conflict. They had learned how to return to one another after getting lost. As they stood beneath the quiet night sky, the distance that had once seemed impossible to cross had become nothing more than a memory, a reminder that the strongest relationships are not those without pain, but those where both people continue choosing kindness, honesty, and understanding, even after the hardest nights. Jimin and Jungkook begin a new chapter together, learning that true trust is strengthened through everyday choices and honest conversations. The first rain of autumn arrived quietly. Tiny droplets tapped against the apartment windows before dawn, carrying with them the familiar scent of wet earth that always reminded Jimin of new beginnings. He woke earlier than usual. Instead of reaching for his phone, he stood by the window with a warm cup of tea, watching the city slowly awaken beneath a silver-gray sky. For the first time in weeks, the silence around him felt peaceful. A soft yawn came from behind. Jungkook shuffled into the living room wearing an oversized sweater, his hair still tousled from sleep. "Been awake long?" "Only a little while." Jungkook joined him by the window. Neither spoke immediately. The rain filled the quiet with a gentle rhythm. Neither of them felt the need to interrupt. "It reminds me of that night," Jungkook finally said. Jimin understood without asking which night he meant. The night when a single question had shattered the walls they had unknowingly built between themselves. He lowered his eyes. "I still think about it." "So do I." Jungkook wasn't saying it to reopen old wounds. He was acknowledging them. Scars remained, but they no longer bled. Jimin turned toward him. "If I could go back, I'd tell you everything I was feeling." Jungkook smiled softly. "And I'd tell you what I was afraid of before it became too heavy to carry." Their eyes met. There was no guilt anymore, only quiet understanding. After breakfast, they decided to spend the day away from the apartment. The rain had eased into a light drizzle, leaving the streets shining beneath the muted morning light. They walked through a nearby park where the trees glistened with raindrops. Children splashed through shallow puddles, while elderly couples strolled beneath shared umbrellas. The world moved at an unhurried pace. Jungkook breathed deeply. Forgot how nice this place is. Haven't been here in months. We're too busy, Jimin nodded, or maybe too distracted. As they continued walking, they came across a small wooden bench overlooking a quiet pond. The water rippled gently as raindrops touched its surface. Jungkook sat first. Jimin followed. For several minutes, they simply watched the circles spreading across the water. It's strange, Jungkook said. What is? I used to think trust meant never feeling afraid. Jimin listened carefully. But now I think trust means being honest even when you're afraid. Jimin smiled, liked that definition better. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I actually wrote something. Jungkook looked surprised. You wrote another journal entry? Not exactly. He unfolded the paper. I wanted to put something into words. Jungkook waited quietly. Jimin read aloud. I can't promise that life will never become complicated again. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes or lose my way. But I can promise that I won't let silence speak for me anymore. If I'm scared, I'll tell you. If I'm overwhelmed, I'll tell you. And if I ever begin drifting away without realizing it, I hope you'll reach out your hand before the distance becomes too great. When Jimin finished reading, he folded the paper again. Jungkook's eyes had become glossy. You really wrote that? I did. Kook laughed softly through the emotion in his voice. Gotten better at expressing yourself. I had a good reason to learn. Two of them sat quietly as the rain slowly came to an end. A faint rainbow appeared above the distant skyline. It wasn't vivid, it was subtle, almost hidden among the clouds, yet it was enough. Jungkook looked toward it with a gentle smile. You know, HM, I don't need perfect days anymore. Just don't want us to stop talking. Jimin answered without hesitation. We won't. They rose from the bench and continued walking along the winding path. The puddles reflected patches of blue sky beginning to break through the clouds. The storm had passed, not because someone had erased it, but because they had walked through it together. As the afternoon sunlight finally reached the park, Jimin realized something important. Healing wasn't a destination waiting at the end of hardship. It was something built in ordinary moments. A shared breakfast, an honest conversation, a quiet walk beneath the rain, and the courage to ask difficult questions before silence could answer them instead. Side by side, they left the park with lighter hearts than they had carried in many weeks. Neither of them knew exactly what tomorrow would bring, but they no longer feared facing it alone. Together, they stepped forward into a future defined not by the pain they had endured, but by the trust they had chosen to rebuild. One sincere conversation at a time. The morning sun poured through the apartment windows with a gentle warmth that made everything seem calmer than it had in a long time. Dust drifted lazily through the golden light, while the faint aroma of coffee and toasted bread filled the kitchen. It was an ordinary morning, the kind that often passed unnoticed, yet both Jimin and Jungkook understood that ordinary moments had become precious. Jimin was humming quietly as he prepared breakfast. Jungkook leaned against the doorway, watching him with a small smile. Been smiling a lot lately, Jungkook said. Jimin glanced over his shoulder. Have I? You have. I guess I forgot how nice it feels. Jungkook chuckled. I'm glad you remembered. Jimin placed 2 plates on the table before taking his seat. For a while they ate without speaking, but unlike the silence they had once feared, this one felt peaceful, comfortable, and familiar. After breakfast, they decided to clean the apartment together. Old magazines were stacked into boxes, unused clothes folded neatly into donation bags, and dusty shelves wiped clean. As they worked, they uncovered forgotten photographs tucked inside an old storage box. Jungkook picked one up. It showed the two of them laughing uncontrollably during a picnic years earlier. Jimin's hair had been blown wildly across his face, while Jungkook had nearly fallen off a picnic blanket from laughing too hard. Remember this? Jungkook said. You spent half an hour trying to fly a kite. It landed in a tree, 3 different trees. Jungkook laughed. I still think the wind was against me. The wind wasn't the problem. My skills, Jimin nodded dramatically. They were ambitious. Both of them burst into laughter. It was effortless, natural. The kind of laughter that came from memories untouched by misunderstanding. As they continued sorting through the box, Jimin found another item, a small notebook. Its cover was faded, its edges worn. Jungkook looked at it curiously. Another journal. Jimin shook his head. No, he opened it carefully. It's a list. List of what? Things I wanted us to do someday. Jungkook leaned closer. The pages contained dozens of handwritten ideas. Watch the sunrise from a quiet hill. Learn how to bake bread together. Take photographs without worrying whether they're perfect. Visit the sea during winter. Plant a small garden. Write letters to our future selves. Jungkook smiled as he read each line. You never showed me this. Kept thinking there would always be more time. Jungkook looked at him. Now, Jimin closed the notebook gently. Now I think time becomes meaningful only when we actually use it. That afternoon, they decided to cross one dream off the list. The nearby botanical garden had reopened after months of renovations, and they spent hours wandering among rows of colorful flowers and towering trees. The air carried the sweet fragrance of blossoms mixed with the earthy scent left behind by yesterday's rain. Butterflies drifted lazily between flowers. Children chased one another across open lawns. The entire garden seemed alive with quiet happiness. Jungkook stopped near a small pond covered with blooming lilies. It's beautiful. Jimin nodded. It is. I think I finally understand something. What? I kept believing happiness had to be something extraordinary. He watched a dragonfly skim across the water, but maybe it's just this. Jimin followed his gaze, a calm afternoon, gentle breeze, comfortable silence, someone important standing beside you. Maybe, Jimin agreed. No, Jungkook smiled. I'm pretty sure. On the way home, they stopped at a small bakery. The owner greeted them warmly and handed them 2 freshly baked pastries still warm from the oven. Jungkook took one bite and laughed. This is amazing. Jimin tasted his own. I think we found our new favorite place. Definitely. They walked home slowly, sharing stories about childhood memories, embarrassing school moments, and dreams they had quietly abandoned over the years. Some dreams still felt impossible. Others suddenly seemed worth trying again. That evening after dinner, they carried 2 chairs onto the balcony. The sky was unusually clear. Countless stars shimmered above the sleeping city. Jungkook looked upward. I used to think people changed because they stopped caring. Jimin remained quiet. But now I think people sometimes lose themselves. Finding each other again takes patience. Jimin smiled softly. I'm grateful you were patient with me. Jungkook turned toward him. I'm grateful you came back. Words were simple. They needed nothing more. Neither of them pretended life would never become difficult again. Misunderstandings would still happen. Stress would still appear. There would be days when communication felt harder than it should. But they had discovered something stronger than fear. They had learned that relationships weren't preserved by perfection. They endured because 2 people continued choosing each other, especially on the ordinary days when no one else was watching. The stars remained bright above them, scattered across the endless night like quiet reminders that even after the darkest evenings, light always found a way to return.